sinners, and saints. Dust off those horns and halos. It's time for Alan After Dark.
This may come as a surprise to many of you, but at one time in my life, I was very innocent. Yes, I know. You think that I'm just fibbing, but I really was an innocent and naive young man. And I'm going to tell you about a time when this was true. So let's take a trip back in time to when I truly was an innocent young man. I was around 19 years old, trying to save up enough money to get back into college. I couldn't afford it, so I had to raise the money. I had landed a temporary job at a pretty large manufacturing company in a nearby town that was like the biggest town in the region. You know, there's two metropolitan areas, but this was the big town in between. And it was a bit intimidating when I started. You know, I'd had a few little odds and ends jobs up to that point. It was still frustrating because this was still a temp job, but I desperately needed money. I wound up being part of a shipping and receiving department where things would be shipped out and we would receive the raw materials in that were used in making the product that this company produced. As you start really getting the hang of the job, you start, at least if not making friends, you become acquainted and get more comfortable with the people you work with. And this being in the Bible Belt, I guess people just assume that you've got all these Bible beaters everywhere. Well, you do have a few, but you have more of the trashy kind of people, the sordid, dirty, naughty people, we'll call it. And at that time, I still had this pretty sweet and innocent reputation. I looked like a very naive person. I was very unattractive, like I've talked about before. I've described myself that way a lot, and it's still true to this day. Luckily, I'm funny and I have the confidence and cockiness to get laid. As you're getting to know people, they will start letting their guard down and start showing sides to themselves that they wouldn't normally show people. You really do become a sort of abstract family in a workplace, especially if you know your job and you're nice and you get along with people, even the ones that are assholes. And there were several that were absolutely assholes. There was one guy who was, to say he was rough around the edges is an understatement. He was a total asshole, very arrogant and very smug, even though he was basically a white trash hick. He was a fuckface, but that redneck white trash look, especially with somebody who played softball on the weekends, he had a great body. That can be quite appealing, shall we say. I guess one of the things that really kind of bugged me about him, other than being a redneck, white trash asshole, was that he was the type that knew he was hot. He was arrogant with that. He was very proud of his sex appeal. He was married to a woman, but I came to discover about a year into working there that he also had a mistress. Let's call him Wayne. The best way to describe Wayne's physical appearance outside of the white trash redneck part, he was sort of a sandy, brownish blonde hair, maybe even a tint of red, but he had a thick mustache and he always had a thicker than 5 o'clock shadow. He tended to wear t-shirts or a flannel shirt unbuttoned with jeans and sneakers. He had a very aggressive, booming voice. And I'll be honest, I found him both repulsive and totally hot. When everybody that was on the team got to know me and understand that I really could do good work, and I was doing good work. They kind of took me into the family, so to speak. We had Wayne, and let's see, I'll say Tony, and there was Robert, and I'll say Tom, and ironically, another person with the same name, so we'll also call him Wayne as well. So we have two Waynes, and I'll try to, well, let's not call the second one Wayne. Let's call him John, and let's hope that I can keep track of all this as I'm regaling you with this story. I've said many times that there are certain people that can just read you and know who you are. Once again, let me remind you, I was really at my innocent and naive phase. I knew that I was gay when I was really, really young. I've told you this before. So that wasn't an issue. But I was wise enough to know that you never really ever told anybody or openly shared it out in the real world unless it was one of your absolute closest friends. While I was working here at this manufacturing facility, I was in the closet. And it was hard work. It was busy work. It was constant work. But I did actually kind of like it. And I liked working there. And I liked most of the people that I worked with. I think that Wayne, or I suspect that Wayne, thought I was gay. I'll start with some basic conversations that, looking back on it, kind of tell me that he thought I was. We were about to unload a truck, and I was waiting. I did the inventory counts, and I checked off the receipts and everything to make sure we received what we had. And we were kind of standing there. Well, he was on a forklift, and I was standing beside him, and we were just chatting about stuff. Just general talk. And somehow the conversation turned because of him. And he was describing this time. His car broke down and he was hitchhiking back to town. This guy pulls over and offers him a ride. And he said it was an older man. I was like 19 and he was about 30 at the time. So I think the guy he was talking about, the guy that was supposedly older, would have been in his 30s when Wayne was like 20-something. And he said, "Alan, dude, you would never believe it, but we were in the car and he offered me $50 to suck my dick." I'm like, "Really?" I was like, "Well, why did you say?" And he just said, "I didn't know anything to say. I just said no, that I wasn't going to do that. But this guy really did find me hot and he wanted to get my dick." I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, if it was me, I would have said yes, got the money, and jumped out of the car." And that was that on that conversation. But I thought, what a weird thing to tell me, just in general conversation, just chatting. And he told me that. Well, then a few weeks later, we were talking about experiences in the hospital or with doctors. And he had been in some sort of accident, a car accident of some kind. And he was in the hospital for several days. And he said, one day, my nurse, and it was a fucking male nurse, was giving me a sponge bath, and he started soaping up and rubbing around my dick, lathering it up. I didn't know what to do. I just kind of pulled away finally, and I didn't know what to expect, but he was just lathering me all up, stroking my dick, saying that he was just washing me. But that was something else. When he's telling this story, he has gotten off the forklift, and I'm standing there with my little clipboard and my pen and all my papers, and he plops down on the ground and he leans against the forklift. You know how guys will sometimes put one foot up, pressing it up against whatever they're leaning against? Well, when he was doing that, his hands were on his dick. He wasn't really rubbing it, but his hands were on it. And and of course my eyes wandered down, because that's a fetish of mine. If you've followed the podcast from the beginning, you know that baseball players have always been one of my kinks. And it turns me on when they adjust their cup and touch themselves. So when he's telling me the story, he is holding on to his own dick. He's squeezing it with both hands. I honestly am just taking it in. And the suspicious side of me says he's trying to bait me into saying something, than to make an accusation, even though he is telling me what really is an intimate story about his cock, about men wanting to suck it and one who touched it, while at the same time squeezing his dick through those tight denim jeans.
Yeehaw!
This was old school. So this factory had time clocks. So you had to literally clock in and clock out with your time card every day. Because we were in a distribution center that was a little bit away from the main manufacturing facility, it was a little bit lax, especially right around quitting time. So let's say that quitting time was 4:30. Well, most of us would gather right at like 4:25 and wait out those last 5 minutes to clock out on time. Sometimes Tony would be standing like and chatting with me, and he and I kind of struck up a relatively decent friendship. And Wayne would just come up behind him, slide his arms around his waist, and press his dick up against Tony's ass.
Ugh, what?
That first time I saw him do it, he rubbed his dick, through his jeans. He didn't take it out. Rubbed it against Tony's ass, and Tony busted out laughing and pulled away and said, "Will you stop that?" Nobody else reacted, but I know that I was kind of like, what did I just watch there? Did he just, what would count today as possibly even sexual assault, I guess, right? Rubbing your front against a guy's ass? And I'm like, what is he doing? Why does he act this way? He's so cocky and arrogant about everything. I guess in my own way, I was jealous. I noticed that he never come up behind me and did that. So Wayne sort of established that environment. There was a sexual hint almost every day, an element of sex in our everyday work. Now, I was becoming closer friends with the guys that were considered clerks like I was. And so Tom and John were hired later on, both as temps, and they did the same thing that I did, but in a little bit of a different way. There was just that much work. John would go on to get a full-time job there, and Tom would too. And both of them Tom wound up being fired, and John wound up being laid off when the facility closed. So in this environment of hard work and everything, you develop these sort of friendships, and you just never know where they're going to lead. Tom and I did become friends. Tom, I guess you could say, was a sort of Tom Selleck knockoff, but nowhere near as attractive. He had that full, thick black mustache, the dark hair, dark eyebrows, but he was a little dopey. That's how I would describe him. And he fell in love with this girl that was also a temp working at one of the other offices within the company, but she was married. And he was telling me that they were having an affair. Well, usually we would go together to get lunch. We would go to McDonald's or one of the restaurants around the facility. And I don't know, some days I'd have the food in my lap or whatever as we're driving back to the factory, to our office, and he would say, "Give me a French fry." Well, I would start feeding him French fries while he drove. I didn't think anything about it, but now that I look back on it, that's a little kind of homo, isn't it? It would just be weird things like that. And I think with the way that Wayne acted, it made me a little bit more curious and maybe a little bit more aggressive. I remember one time we had ordered like Chinese food from this restaurant, and I drove, and Tom rode with me to help with all the food. When we were coming back, it was in his lap, and we get to the office. I get out, and I'm like, "Let me take some of that." He says, "Well, here, just grab it." And I'm like, "Well, if I grab it off your lap, my hand's going to slide up and under to where you know what is." He says, "That's okay, go ahead." And I slid under there, and my hand rubbed his dick, and he never said a word about it. And I kept thinking, he lets me do things that are kind of gay, but he's supposed to be in love with this girl that he's supposedly having the affair with. It seemed like once a week after that, that one evening, whenever we're getting ready to clock out, that Wayne would come up behind Tony and press his dick up against his ass. And I just remember the one time where Tony said, "If you keep doing that, I'm going to get naked." And everybody busted out laughing on that. But here I am, this closeted gay guy who, now looking back on it, I think had been pegged by at least two of them who were supposedly straight, but seemed to be very intrigued with the gay boy. I mean, at the end of the day, most of them would argue a mouth is a mouth. As long as they're getting off, why do they care who the mouth's attached to? Not all of them feel that way, but primarily a bunch of them do. While all this was going on, they brought in a new manager for us, and we'll call him Jim. Now, Jim was your strawberry blonde guy, a little bit older than us, in his 40s, with a scraggly beard, but it was a full beard. The hairs would kind of curl down onto his lip. He wasn't the prettiest guy, but he wasn't the ugliest guy either. And I liked him. I thought he was great. But Wayne, every chance that he and I were separate from the rest of the group, he would say, "He's gay. The way he acts and stuff, I think he's gay. He'll be going after my dick next." And I'm like, what the fuck ever. And I'd always wonder, why was Wayne, this straight guy, married with a mistress at the place he worked, was so obsessed with what guys wanted to suck his dick? I think he just assumed that every guy wanted to suck his dick. But I think what it might have been is that he wanted every guy to suck his dick. But, you know, I got no proof of that, but that's the way it felt. So we had that kind of a little bit of an unease. I noticed how the guys that worked with Wayne did their best to steer clear of Jim, even though I'm pretty sure that Wayne and Tom thought that I was gay. When John came along, Wayne had told me that he remembered him from high school and that John was one of the cheerleaders, which was considered a big pussy, sissy thing in Tennessee, that you had guys who were cheerleaders. It's only a butch thing when you're a male cheerleader in college. But anyway, so he was already dropping hints that John might be a homo as well. Well, no, John, who was a sort of blondish guy, a little bit bulky, a bearish type with no facial hair, nice, decent nonetheless, but turns out he was pretty much a drunk, an alcoholic. Didn't know it at first because he always seemed polite, and he and I and Tom would often play tennis together at nearby public tennis courts. So we did have a bond going there. Well, one Friday after work, John and I played doubles with two of the girls at the main facility. They worked in shipping and they were higher ups. But John really liked one of them and I didn't think nothing of it. They were both great. We were friends. And we had a good time that night, just playing tennis. Well, the girls finally had to go home. And John said, "Well, I'm not ready to go home. Can we just ride around?" And I'm like, "Well, sure." I was driving. And I said, "Sure, we can drive around." He says, "Well, can we get some beer and stuff?" And I'm like, "Sure." And I said, "Well, I'm not going to drink because I'm driving." And he says, "No, I want to drink. So you can drive around and just drive anywhere. Let's go over to where you live, over out that way." And I'm like, "Seriously? You really want to go out that far?" And he goes, "Well, yeah." So he went and got some beer and he had it in the car and he was drinking and I'm driving and it's finally getting dark. It's summertime. So we're passing 9 o'clock. And he is just throwing these beers down. And I could tell, he's getting drunk. He starts leaning out the window, throwing the empty bottles at stop signs, which could have gotten us stopped, arrested, etc. But thankfully, I wasn't drinking, I was sober, and I was driving. Well, as he's getting drunk, he starts talking about sex. And he talks about he's got a girlfriend that he's in love with, and he said, this past weekend when we were fucking, she put her finger up my ass.
Yeehaw.
And Alan, it felt fucking good. Now, my dad always told me that no guy takes anything up his ass. That makes you a fag. But I liked it. I'm like, you did? He goes, yeah. Don't tell anybody I told you that, but boy, does it feel good. And I'll do it again. I'm like, that's great. Whatever gets you off, you know. And he just kept on and on about how a finger up his ass felt good. Finally, he said, I need to pee. I'm like, okay, but we were near an area that was pretty rural and nobody around, private. And so I said, we can pee here, and got out of the car. And you know, I'm that young guy, but feeling it, I wanted to see his dick. So I walked around to the other side of the car too, and I peed. And he was just chatting away with me with his dick out, pissing. And I got to look at his dick. And had I had the balls that I have now, I would have said something like, you know, I could suck that for you, and I can put a finger up your ass. But I didn't. But I know what his dick looks like. I might be one of the few guys in the world that does know what his dick looks like. Anyway, he's like, don't you know some girls, Alan, to call that I could fuck or something? And I'm like, well, I could. I said, I'll try somebody. I faked it. I went to a phone booth. And if you don't know what a phone booth is, fuck you. Look it up. Anyway, I faked like I called somebody, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't find anybody. So it's probably best that we head home. So we did. And he was passed out in my car, got him pulled into his house, and I was like, you can do this, right? You know how to get in, you've got your keys and everything. Yeah, I'm good. And I'm sure he had one of the worst fucking hangovers that you could ever have in your life. It turned out that he was an alcoholic, and we never did that again. Nothing like that, even though I offered to drive him around again, because the next time I would have made an invitation, an offer, but I would have felt guilty because he was drunk and he may not know what he's doing. And I certainly couldn't handle the guilt of taking advantage of someone who didn't control themselves and may not have full coherence. Is that the right word? Probably. Now, I know most of you are probably saying, what the fuck are you getting at, Alan? What is up with this story other than just regaling us on a favorite memory of yours? I think it's just that obvious notion that straight guys can be homophobes, but they have this innate curiosity about gay guys. It doesn't matter how white trash or redneck they are. They think about getting up in that business, and they might think about a guy sucking their dick, but they have at least once in their life thought about sucking a dick. They can ignore their religion, they can ignore their background, they can ignore their daddy saying, if you take something up the ass, you're a fag. They are curious. And that makes me even more happy that I'm a homo. Thank you for joining me for this edition of Alan After Dark. I know it's been horny, I know it's been flighty, but I hope you've been entertained and indulged. I know I have. Holla. Remember, take life by the balls and be real. We'll see you soon. See, told you that at one time in my life I was innocent and naive.